Hi, and welcome to STEM Stories with Mr. Ewing. This is part one of a 7-part series about your brain and understanding your brain and how your brain works and how you can actually learn to change or work your brain. So, the brain is a giant, well, not a giant, but an organ that is actually housed inside our skull. So, the skull is made up of about 23 different bones that when you're born aren't together and they slowly fuse. So, let's jump in and learn a little bit about our brain. Now, the brain is that spot where basically everything that our body does, even me moving the hands around, talking, articulating, using the words that I use, it's all housed up here in our brain. And things that we can't even control or we don't control, like our heartbeat, the way we breathe, how our organs actually run and function. When we eat something, our brain is actually working our stomach without us even knowing. It's doing all that work for us. It's actually a pretty cool organ. Now, the brain is actually kind of like this. It's all these different folds and it's made of many different parts. And all the different parts of our brain actually do different things for our body. Now, if we did a scan of our brain, we'd actually be able to see deep inside and all the different parts and components and how it's made up. So if you notice, it shows all the folds up here, but down here, we actually can look deeper into how our brain is sectioned off. And if you look at the upper right hand corner, towards the bottom of that skull picture, it actually shows us some other components of our brain. It's actually a really amazing organ. This is actually a photograph of my brain, the inside of my head. And if you look at the very top of this picture, what do you think those white circles are? Those are my eyes. So this is a scan of my brain at about this level. It's kind of cool. And another picture of inside my brain. Here's my side view. Again, what do you think that piece is? Those are my eyes, and we can see how they are actually connected to my brain. And it's a pretty amazing organ. And inside the brain, here's another picture of my brain, are a lot of blood vessels, because it's super important that blood flow gets to our brain, because that's what brings the oxygen and the blood sugar and keeps our brain functioning. It actually looks like a big pile of worms, doesn't it? But that's what it looks like inside my brain. So the brain is made up of a multitude of different parts and different sections, and they all have very important roles, and they all work together to form all of the functions that we have to do during the day. So let's jump in and actually break our brain apart. Well, not physically break our brain apart, but to pull it apart so that we can understand the different components of our brain. We're going to be using this diagram from WebMD because I thought it was really great. So this green section down here at the bottom is our brain stem. The brain stem is connected to our spinal cord, and if you reach around to the back of your neck, you can feel those hard bones that make up our vertebrae. And our spinal cord, which is about the size of our finger, goes down the center of it. That's connected to our brain stem. But our brain stem controls our breathing, our heartbeat, our facial expressions, and a lot more. A lot of the things our voluntary muscles do, but a lot of our involuntary muscles, or involuntary actions. Now, to the back of our brain is the cerebellum. The cerebellum helps you coordinate when you move. That's your balance. As a child, it's not as well developed because we haven't quite gotten our development of our balance done. But as we start to learn that, we start to actually learn how to control our body and balance and move. Now, above that, still in the back, is our occipital lobe. I hope I'm saying that correctly. But that's what makes sense of what we see. So it's interesting that what we see here is actually translated back here. And if you're ever wondering about how our eyes actually work, it's really cool. Take a moment, step out, and do a little research on how our eyes create those optical images and how our brain works with that. It's really kind of cool. Now, in the very back, right below, between the cerebellum and our stem cord, our brain stem, is the temporal lobe. This is what makes sense of everything that we hear. Now, it's interesting that goes in here and it's connected very close. I love how all the pieces of our head are connected. The back here at the very top is the parietal lobe. That helps us perceive all the things we touch, taste, and actually feel pain. So very back section back here. Now, back over where we were talking, back here is the pituitary gland, super little tiny part of our brain. And that's what actually helps release all the hormones that actually give our body life. Now, in another section, we're going to actually talk about the different brain hormones, but that little pituitary gland, super important for hormonal release. Your oxytocin, your dopamines, your adrenaline, all of those. Now, in the center, all the way there, is your hypothalamus. Now, your hypothalamus is what helps you regulate your temperature. So if you're feeling cold, you're feeling hot, also your hunger and your thirst. So if you're ever feeling thirsty, you can actually say, hey, I need some water because my hypothalamus is telling me I'm thirsty. Now, in the front of our brain is the frontal lobe. This is probably the most critical part of our brain when it comes to learning. It helps us reason, plan, pay attention, and actually helps us move very specific body parts. The frontal lobe is what's allowing me to do that right now. Now, part of the frontal lobe is what we call the prefrontal lobe. That has some very specific components and responsibilities for, especially when it comes to learning and how we learn. And then at the very center of our brain, if we go in, is the hippocampus. And it helps us actually retain those long-term memories. So when we're learning, which is helping us here, we need to get that information into our hippocampus. Our hippocampus, sort of like a hippopotamus, same kind of prefix. Our hippocampus is actually where we put those long-term memories so that we can recall it. So think about riding a bike. Once you learn how to ride the bike and properly and stay up, remember we're going to use that part of our brain back here for balance, the hippocampus is going to help us remember how to ride that bike. So we pretty much never forget. We can go years without riding a bike, but when you get on it, your hippocampus is going to send out all those messages and say, this is how you get it done. Those are basically the components of your brain. Now, as we move through these 7 parts of this series, we're going to learn some specifics about other parts of our brain. There are different parts of our brains in relating to learning and how we actually can overcome obstacles and train our brain to learn the things we want. It's all super important that we know our brain and actually we know the parts of our brain that does the work that we want it to do. I know it's just a brain, but is it just a brain? It's much more important. So if you had to make a guess, what would you think is the most important part of your brain? I know what I think, and having been inside or seen inside my brain, now you've seen inside my brain, I wonder if your brain looks like mine. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about your brain.